Righto, Crash. On a cricket front, your wisdom and experience, is there anything so emotive as a bowler having his action questioned and the dreaded word chucker, which casually gets used in a really serious circumstance? Matt Kunemann finds himself here. Were you surprised as this emerged?
It's an interesting one, Gerard, because you're right, it's such an emotive issue. I remember Bill Laurie was on air when Matthias Muralitharan, the Sri Lankan, was called in 1995 at the MCG by Daryl Hare, and Bill said, "I feel sick in the stomach." And a lot of cricket fans felt that way. Ian Metcalf, who was at the ground, shed tears when he saw Daryl's arm goes out because Ian had been called himself. Now, there's been a query over Matt's action. There's been whispers for a few years, as there are over a lot of finger spinners. And Matthew Kunemann, who's a terrific young lad, he's devastated by this, as you would be, because your whole future's at stake. He's come off the top of the mountain where he's just taken most wickets in the series in Sri Lanka. So I've always believed that finger spinners should be routinely checked when they start their first-class careers. And if a problem is there, it can be picked up behind closed doors and told them when they're 19 years old, and they can do it without anyone even noticing it's been done. But this has gone on and on. I understand it's such a divisive issue, Gerard, that I understand there was even division in the ranks of the umpires, that one umpire in Sri Lanka felt very strongly about Matt Kunemann's action being suspect, and others didn't. So, this is what this chucking rule is. It's very hard to prove. It's 15 degrees you're allowed. Umpires often say that if something looks suspect, it generally is, because 15 degrees isn't much. But Matt will have testing. It's a brutal testing regime. You stand there with sensors on your arms, and they're completely quiet, and you must bowl at the speed you bowl in the game. So they'll say to Matt Kunemann, you must bowl, 85 kilometres an hour, somewhere around that, and you must spin the ball too. You can't just bowl a straight arm ball. And there's very little noise or communication, and you think people have pressure when they sing on Australia Idol or Dancing with the Stars. This is an audition where your whole career's at stake before a handful of biomechanists. It's brutal, Gerard, absolutely brutal.
Is there any failure, do you think, in the system, Crash, that allows it to get to this moment for an Australian bowler?
Absolutely. And that's the thing. I know Stephen O'Keefe's very strong on this, and I agree. I just think if a guy is borderline, get him tested early, get him tested behind closed doors, because once you reach international cricket, you are at the whims of a whole different group of people. And that's the sadness. And, it's left arm spinning is a deceptively tricky art. It's why the record for the most number of test wickets taken by a left arm spinner in Australia is still 79 by Jack Saunders more than a century ago. The Victorian who, Flat Jack Saunders. So it's a difficult art to master, and he does it very well. But the hard thing is, Gerard, is that everything he does now in his career, they're still slightly stigmatised, because even if he passes, people, you're at the whim of every half-smart spectator or every overseas sort of player who's coming in. But it starts with the players, Gerard, there's no doubt. Players talk to umpires. I remember when Henry Olonga made his test debut from Zimbabwe against Pakistan, he bowled 3 balls. And then Amir Sohail was batting, and he leant over to the umpire and whispered in his ear, "Open your effing eyes," Yep. And so that was one of the more dramatic examples. But the Sri Lankan players approached their management for the first test in Galle to have a look at Matthew Kunemann's bowling, and their video guys didn't see a problem with it, but they continued their whispers, and that's what it led to.
Yeah, it makes it a tricky path for him from here. Just so the Champions Trophy we'll talk about in a moment. Just as we look back on the Sri Lankan Test series, I was struck by the idea, Crash, is Steve Smith the greatest player of spin bowling Australia's ever had?
Yeah, well, put it this way, we've had some beauties, haven't we? I always felt that Darren Lehman was the mark by which everyone else is judged. And I think Steve might even have him, like you could put him in the same class as Brian Lara, who all the Australian spinners, when they bowled to Brian Lara, they'd say, I remember Stuart McGill saying, just once, I'd love to beat him with a wrong un. I dream about it. But I don't think it ever happened. Brian was so good. But Smith, he's got the footwork. And do you know what? This is a great lesson for parents and kids, because his father took Steve out the backyard in his home down Cronulla Way in Sydney when he was a boy, and he bowled all these quirky deliveries with flicking his wrist and everything on a little sort of driveway patch they had there. And he'd test him out, and it was worn, and the ball would shoot off at crazy angles. And Steve faced thousands of these balls from his dad. And that's the fundamental bedrock of why he is where he is today. That beautiful backyard tutelage, of which I don't see a lot today, Gerard.
Yep.
I'm not seeing much backyard cricket around the suburbs. But, he's got the footwork, he's got the feet, and he trusts his judgment too. And it was funny watching the bowlers bowl to him. They had that sense of helplessness, and it was like dialing back to Steve Smith era 2016, where you just couldn't get him out.
Yeah. So centuries against India, centuries on the subcontinent. But it was just watching him bat, thinking, I'm not sure I've ever seen anyone quite so nimble and graceful in an Australian cap against spin. The other element was, how well did he captain?
Mm-hmm. Well, see, this is the thing, and this was the standout for me. He's a far better captain now than he was when he was full-time. And we all know how bad a sleeper he is. And he was restlessly sort of, getting no sleep at all during games where he's a full-time captain and being ground down. Now he's up, alive and alert, and his captaincy was just fantastic. And I thought there was one beautiful little piece of captaincy, and it doesn't stand out as being dramatic, but when he brought Bo Webster on 3 overs before to bowl the third last over on one day's play, he got a wicket. Now, every sense of every captain would say, well, you now keep him on for the last over of the day. But he said, no, we've got a right-hander in. I'll put Kuhnemann back on for the last over. He'll spin it away and we'll get a slips catch. And guess what happened first ball? Yeah. Kuhnemann, beautifully pitched delivery, Smith slips catch. So, yeah, it was good. And Kuhnemann bowled really well on that tour. Like, let's put the chucking issue to one side. But he's learnt to flight the ball really well. And when a bloke's starting getting stumpings, that he's using the air really craftily. Like in India a couple of years ago, he darted them in. He was different this time. So he's a great student of the game. And so we'll wait and see what the results of these tests are in his bowling. And it'll be there for all to see. If he is found to have work to do, Kuhnemann, it's not the end of him. He can work on that. But it is jolting. As I said, I understand he's very upset by it all.
Robert Craddock, all your wisdom and experience. Where's Labuschagne now in his career, and is he selectable for the World Test Championship?
Yeah, I believe he's more out than in at the moment, Gerard. 1 century in his last 27 tests, that says to me out. And also I think if he's a 50-50 selection chance in Australia, I think it's different to overseas. He averages 20 runs per test innings more in Australia than overseas, 55 compared to 35. And that's a factor right there. That's why he got one of the reasons why when he was hanging by a thread in Adelaide last Australian summer, they held on to him. He can, I think, perhaps resuscitate his cause in the Champions Trophy, believe it or not. Like you go in there and you make runs again and they feel it's ticking over. And the two other things in his favour are, one, the World Test Championship is the end of a cycle of which he's played every game. And the selectors have shown that they just leaned in a 50-50, leaned towards giving a guy an extra chance. If he failed in that, I would say categorically gone for the West Indies tour. They will look for new talent with a view to blooding talent for England next season. And that's the big one. But he's just lost confidence. And, you've got Cameron Green out of the team. What do you do with Josh Inglis? Sam Constas. So there's 3 players putting pressure on him, which he hadn't been putting pressure on him before. So I've got him more out. What have you got him, Gerard? So, I've got him more out than in, but potentially savable if he shines in the Champions Trophy odd though that may sound.
No, I agree with that. Is this setup runs in any form count? And I like that. And I think that has served them well. So my issue here is, so Australia needs Labuschagne long-term at 3 making big runs. That's the premise. He's not a disposable cricketer in my mind. But they should have dropped him. They've missed their moment to drop him when he hasn't been performing. He would be back by now. He has shown through his white ball career, he responds to being at the pointy end of the blade. How many times has he been dropped in 50-over cricket? But he's the body in the lake that keeps coming to the surface, and he plays a huge role for Australia in winning the previous World Cup because of it. He should have been dropped, gone back to the Shield, rediscovered his hunger and whatever else it is in red ball cricket, and then back into the side. So I would have had him out and then back in by the World Championship. He's not one of the old brigade. I feel like he gets wrapped up in that, in what order are they going to retire? He's a young cricketer. Australia desperately needs him making centuries at 3, but not if he feels like he's safe no matter what. The lack of hunger in his cricket when he got in, and it was hard to get in, and he just dabbed that ball to gully, that doesn't do it for me. Out. You don't own 3 in this team. Go and fight your way back. I would have had him out and back in, rejuvenated by now to lead the charge at that World Test Championship.
Mm-hmm. And you've just mentioned one of the key things with his game. There's no doubt a lot of this started 18 months ago where he said to his coaches, I want to be a better white ball cricketer. And they said, good, that means getting bat on ball on everything outside off stump and gliding balls through gully. That'll keep you ticking over. But you spend 3 hours practicing that in the nets, and he's a practiceaholic, and then go back to test match mode where to the same balls, you leave. Your bat goes high in the air. So your radar becomes scrambled, Gerard. That's what I'm saying. And that's what's happened to him. And I agree. Look, I understand one slight point in his favour. And again, I emphasise, I've got him more out than in at the moment. I think he's probably gone. But that they don't necessarily love the shape of the top order without him. Yes, Steve Smith could come in at 3, or they could put Cameron Green in at 3. But Green hasn't played much cricket. Smith they much prefer at 4. And he's played 6 seasons at Glamorgan in England, so he knows the conditions over there. So it's a slightly more complex debate than what a lot of people think when you simply see 1 century in 27 tests, which normally means a categorical gone.
It's a big question. What is the Champions Trophy now, Crash? This odd little tournament which felt like it was long defunct, brought back, played in Pakistan, but India are based in Dubai. It's unclear where any final would be played. She just seems a little on the weird side.
It is on Amazon Prime, if you don't mind. And it's just a very, very strange little tournament set up in 1998 to raise funds for developing nations, and everyone got that. But then 2020 sort of sprouted wings, and it ended up being a total oddity, did it? Australia haven't won a match in the Champions Trophy since 2009, so it's never been high on our priorities, Gerard. But there will be some good games in it. Sometimes I believe it exists just so they can try and schedule a match where India plays Pakistan and they meet so rarely. But Australia will start off against England next week. But you're right, it's just been swamped and just doesn't mean enough in the world. Like, it's no one's top priority, and we're missing Hazelwood, Stark and Cummins, and that probably says enough about it.
I quite like the Australian approach to it. Is they're playing, they'll try, but nothing is being compromised. No compromise being made around Stark or Hazelwood or Cummins, knowing the World Test Championship is there and then the Summer Ashes. And if that means it's a quick exit, then so be it, I think.
Yeah, I tell you what, though, a lot of these young players who failed in the 2 one-dayers against Sri Lanka, it's big bickies for them for restoring their reputation. A guy like Jake Fraser McGurk, like, Gerard, I watched him the other day get out, and the bowl, got out to a knuckle ball, a slower ball, and it was just a classical piece of, obvious deception that I think he almost should have been waiting for. But when batsmen like him take this big hurricane swing, the slower ball will get him every time. And I thought Fraser McGurk's an example of a player who just needs second and third gears in his game, and they're just not there at the moment.
He's still a 20-over cricketer, not a 50-over cricketer, isn't he? Oh, I know he's in this squad because the pitches of Pakistan are likely to be incredibly flat, and that's where he had success in the IPL. But he just isn't making... Like, I fully expect he'll go back to India and have a huge IPL.
Do you know what, though? I still think he needs more. Ricky Ponning's, definitive voice in this, saying he repeatedly says to him, Jake, you don't have to swing like a windmill at 100 miles an hour. Go at 80% and you'll time it more sweetly. So I don't reckon he's heeded that message yet. So he's an interesting study for me, and because he's trying to be David Warner, but David Warner had second and third gears in his game. That was his brilliance, and that's why he adjusted to Test cricket so swiftly, whereas it's just not there in this kid's game. And I'm not sure you can just be that, because bowlers are smart, Gerard. They've got all these different slower balls and knuckle balls, and so Jake Fraser McGurk versus the world is an interesting contest at the moment, yeah.
Can an Australian 11 that might read Short, Head, Smith, Inglis, Carey, Maxwell, Hardy, Abbott, Ellis, Johnson and Zampa have success in this tournament?
I think I'll be surprised if they win it, but I think that there are better players in there than what they showed in Sri Lanka. Like Johnson, I think, can go well. I'm still a big fan of Matt Short, even though he did basically nothing in Sri Lanka. So, and they've still got, Labuschagne, Head could go off in any game, but I'd be surprised if they won the tournament, but not shocked because they can come up from anywhere at the Champions Trophy.
Yes, yeah, you can get super weird results.
Reading a piece from Gideon Haigh, who loves a bit of a offbeat humour, and he said the first match of the Champions Trophy was such an august occasion that Ravi Shastri presented the Man of the Match award to Stephen Fleming. He said, regretfully, because he couldn't read the writing on the trophy, which said it should have gone to Chris Harris. He's very good, Gideon, isn't he?
That's funny. So Wednesday night it starts Pakistan and New Zealand. Saturday night for Australia against England. And then Sunday night is the Pakistan-India game, which is in Dubai. So we'll be on the morning after that.